Imagine walking through a museum long after closing time. The great hall is empty now. The echo of footsteps is gone. The lights are dimmed, not dark, just enough to soften the edges of everything that remains. Glass cases line the room, filled with objects that feel familiar. Stone axes shaped by patient hands, clay vessels cracked by centuries of use, bronze blades dulled by forgotten wars. These objects make sense. They fit the story we were taught, a slow climb from simplicity toward sophistication. But at the far end of the hall, beyond the comfortable narrative, there is another display, smaller, isolated, almost avoided. This case is not meant to be admired. It is meant to be tolerated. Its contents do not rest easily in the timeline, printed on the wall. They sit in quiet defiance, like unanswered questions. This is the corner of the museum where certainty fades, where history lowers its voice, where objects exist that were never supposed to be here. Inside this case is a problem, not a crack in a pot or a missing fragment of stone, but a fracture in time itself. Here is a device that calculates the heavens, built before the birth of Christ. Here is a source of electrical current from an age lit by flame and oil. Here is a map that shows lands no civilization was meant to know. These objects are called out-of-place artifacts. Uparts, a simple name for a profound disruption. They are glitches in the historical record, moments where the smooth line of progress breaks and loops back on itself. They suggest that intelligence did not awaken once and march forward forever. It surged, it receded, it was remembered, then forgotten. We prefer to imagine history as a ladder, each rung higher than the last. But these objects tell a different story, a spiral. Civilizations rising to remarkable heights and collapsing, taking their knowledge with them into silence. What if the past was not ignorant? What if it was simply lost? Tonight, we are going to open that case. Leave the modern world outside the museum doors. The notifications, the noise, the certainty that we already know how this story ends. The halls are quiet now. The guards' footsteps have faded. Only the objects remain, waiting. Walk with me, deeper into the shadows of the past. History teaches us dates. It teaches us names. It teaches us the rise and fall of empires, arranged neatly on timelines that suggest order and inevitability. What it rarely teaches us is how fragile everything truly is. Civilization feels permanent only from the inside. When you are surrounded by stone buildings, digital records, and systems that appear self-sustaining, it is easy to believe that progress is irreversible, that once humanity learns something, it never truly forgets. But this belief is an illusion. Civilization is not a straight road paved with memory. It is a narrow bridge suspended over chaos, and that bridge collapses more often than we care to remember. Knowledge does not exist on its own. It must be recorded. It must be preserved. It must be passed from one generation to the next without interruption. Break that chain, and knowledge does not weaken. It disappears. A single war can erase centuries of learning. A single plague can wipe out the only people who understood how something worked. A single political shift can declare entire fields of knowledge dangerous, heretical, or useless. We often imagine the ancient world as slow and simple, but this is not because it was. It is because so much of it is missing. We are not seeing the ancient world as it was. We are seeing it as what survived. Survival is not a measure of importance or sophistication. It is a matter of chance. Fire does not discriminate between poetry and engineering. Floods do not preserve libraries because their contents are valuable. Time itself is indifferent to meaning. The ancient world wrote on materials that decay. Papyrus curls and crumbles. Ink fades, wood rots. Even stone can be reused, broken, or reduced to rubble. When we find a fragment of ancient knowledge, it feels monumental precisely because it is rare. But rarity is not evidence of scarcity in the past. It is evidence of loss. We speak of the Library of Alexandria as if it were a singular tragedy, but it was only one node in a vast network of human memory. Across Mesopotamia, Egypt, Greece, India, China, and the Americas, knowledge was stored in temples, schools, workshops, and homes. Most of it never reached us, not because it was insignificant, but because it was vulnerable. We assume that genius announces itself through monuments, through pyramids and statues and massive architecture. But much of the most powerful knowledge in any civilization exists quietly, in calculations made on wax tablets, in instruments kept in workshops, in techniques taught orally from master to apprentice. These leave almost no trace. When those traditions end, they do not leave ruins behind. They leave silence. This silence shapes how we imagine the past. We fill the gaps with assumptions. We tell ourselves that ancient people were clever within limits, that they were inventive, but not truly advanced. That complexity is a modern achievement. It is a comforting belief, because it places us safely at the top of the story. But the objects in this museum disturb that comfort. They do not suggest trial and error. They suggest understanding. Precision does not emerge accidentally. Systems do not function without theory, even if that theory is not written in a language we recognize. When an ancient object demonstrates mathematical insight, mechanical sophistication, or chemical control beyond what we expect, it confronts us with an uncomfortable possibility, that the past knew more than we remember, and that what we call progress may depend less on intelligence than on continuity. Consider your own world. How much of what you rely on daily do you truly understand? How many systems function because thousands of invisible steps align perfectly behind the scenes? Electric grids, data storage, manufacturing processes, medical knowledge. Now imagine all written records vanish. No books, no databases, no manuals. Imagine the specialists disappear. The engineers, the technicians, the teachers. How long would your civilization retain its capabilities? Not its artifacts, but its understanding. Future generations might find fragments of technology embedded in ruins. They might discover components whose purpose is unclear. They might debate whether these were ceremonial, symbolic, or misunderstood. They might assume we were less capable than we were, not because we lacked intelligence, but because intelligence without memory leaves little behind. This is the lens through which we must view the past. Ancient people were not prototypes of modern humans. They were modern humans. Their brains were the same. Their curiosity was the same. Their capacity for abstraction, experimentation, and invention was the same. What differed was not cognition, but circumstance. Stability matters. Peace matters. Time matters. A civilization that endures uninterrupted for centuries can accumulate extraordinary knowledge. A civilization repeatedly reset by catastrophe cannot. When collapse happens, it does not politely archive what came before. It scatters it. Survivors prioritize food, shelter, and safety, not astronomy, not engineering theory, not complex manufacturing techniques. What is not immediately useful is abandoned. What is abandoned is forgotten. What is forgotten is eventually unimaginable. This is how advanced ideas can vanish so completely that later generations do not even conceive that they once existed. And yet, not everything is erased. Some objects survive by accident. A device sinks to the ocean floor. A cup is buried in a tomb. A map is copied just enough times to endure. These objects are not explanations. They are hints. They do not tell us the full story. They tell us that a story is missing. This is why they feel so disturbing. They are not traumatic in the way myths are dramatic. They are quiet, unassuming, physical. They can be weighed, measured, tested. They resist dismissal because they obey the laws of physics. They function, they work. And when they work, they imply a body of knowledge behind them. a context that no longer exists. We often try to soften this implication. We call these objects anomalies, outliers, curiosities, but anomalies are not errors. They are signals. They indicate that our model of the past is incomplete. We are comfortable acknowledging ancient art because art does not threaten our sense of superiority. A statue can be beautiful without challenging our technological identity. But technology does. Technology implies mastery. It implies theory applied to matter. It implies deliberate problem solving. When ancient objects demonstrate this mastery at levels we did not expect, they unsettle us because they blur the line between then and now. They suggest that brilliance is not bound to an era, only to preservation. This museum is not asking us to abandon skepticism. It is asking us to expand humility, to accept that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, to recognize that history is not a perfect record, but a damaged archive. As we stand here, at the threshold of these halls, we must recalibrate our expectations. We are not about to witness impossibilities. We are about to encounter survivals, fragments of a deeper past, echoes of minds that solved problems long before we thought such solutions were possible. In the rooms ahead, we will meet 5 such echoes. 5 objects that endured when their context did not. They are not meant to rewrite history on their own. They are meant to remind us of how much history can forget. And they all point toward the same truth. Human ingenuity is ancient. Human memory is not. Amnesia is not dramatic. It does not announce itself with explosions or endings. It arrives quietly, one forgotten detail at a time. First, a technique is no longer practiced. Then the tools used to perform it are repurposed or discarded. Then the words used to describe it lose their meaning. Finally, the idea itself becomes unthinkable. This is how entire domains of knowledge vanish without leaving a trace. We often imagine collapse as sudden, but it is usually slow. A gradual narrowing of priorities, a shrinking of curiosity, a shift from exploration to survival. When resources become scarce, knowledge becomes selective. Only what feeds, shelters, or protects is preserved. Everything else is considered excess. Astronomy becomes superstition. Engineering becomes myth. Mathematics becomes ritual. Over generations, what was once understood becomes symbolic. What was once calculated becomes ceremonial. What was once functional becomes decorative. And eventually, even the symbols lose their meaning. This is how future civilizations inherit artifacts without context. They find objects divorced from the ideas that created them. To them, these objects appear impossible. But impossibility is often just ignorance viewed from the wrong end of time. We assume that if something was truly advanced, it would have spread everywhere, that it would have changed the world permanently, that it would have left undeniable evidence. But knowledge does not spread automatically. It spreads only when conditions allow it to. Ideas require stability. They require institutions. They require trust between generations. Remove these, and even the most powerful insights remain localized, fragile, easily erased. History favors what is simple to copy: stone tools, basic pottery, weapons. Complex systems are harder to transmit. They require training, precision, a shared language of concepts. Without that language, complexity collapses into fragments. This is why we find pyramids, but not the notebooks of their engineers. Why we see aqueducts, but not the calculations behind them. Why we inherit structures without the theories that made them possible. We mistake endurance for sophistication. But endurance only tells us what survived disaster, not what existed before it. The past was not empty between its monuments. It was dense with experimentation, failure, refinement, and insight. Most of it is gone. And yet, something remains. Objects that refuse to fit. They appear suddenly in the archaeological record, fully formed. They do not show a clear lineage of development. They do not come with prototypes or transitional forms. They simply exist. And because they exist, they challenge the assumption that ancient innovation was always incremental and crude. These objects suggest leaps. Moments where understanding crystallized sharply. Moments where theory and craftsmanship aligned. They hint at environments where curiosity was supported long enough for mastery to emerge. But those environments did not last. Something interrupted them. War, climate change, political collapse, cultural repression. Often, we do not know which. History does not always record its own erasures. It only records what comes after. This creates a distorted picture. We see rebirth without remembering what was lost. We celebrate renaissances without acknowledging the dark ages that made them necessary. And so we imagine the past as a series of beginnings. The birth of agriculture, the birth of writing, the birth of science. But birth implies novelty. What if many of these were rediscoveries? What if humanity has solved similar problems many times, only to forget the solutions and solve them again? This does not diminish modern achievement. It reframes it. It suggests that progress is not guaranteed, that it is not a property of time itself, but of fragile human systems. When we encounter an ancient object that feels advanced, our instinct is to isolate it, to treat it as an exception. But exceptions are meaningful. They tell us where our models fail. These objects do not demand that we rewrite all of history. They ask us to admit uncertainty, to accept that our picture of the past is incomplete, that it is biased toward what survived, not what mattered. They remind us that the archaeological record is not a neutral archive. It is a battlefield of preservation. What we find is shaped by chance, by soil chemistry, by climate, by the interests of those who excavated and cataloged. Entire chapters may be missing simply because they left no durable traces. This realization should not frighten us. It should ground us. It connects us to the ancients not as primitives, but as peers separated by circumstance. They lived in worlds as complex and uncertain as ours. They faced problems that demanded creativity, abstraction, and ingenuity. They experimented. They failed. They succeeded. And sometimes they succeeded brilliantly. But brilliance does not guarantee survival. A civilization can reach extraordinary heights and still disappear, not because it was weak, but because it was vulnerable. This is the lesson the objects in this museum carry. They are not symbols of lost supercivilizations. They are symbols of lost continuity. They show us what happens when knowledge is not protected across time. They also offer a mirror. We like to imagine that our own knowledge is secure, that digital storage has solved the problem of memory, that redundancy guarantees permanence. But digital memory is not immune to collapse. It depends on energy, infrastructure, compatibility, and care. Without these, it becomes unreadable noise. Future generations may inherit our artifacts without our understanding. They may find machines they cannot power, data they cannot decode. They may debate our capabilities, just as we debate those of the ancients. They may underestimate us for the same reason, because what we truly knew did not survive intact. This is why these objects matter now, not because they prove the past was advanced, but because they remind us that advancement is fragile. They warn us against arrogance, against assuming that we stand outside the cycles of forgetting. They suggest that the greatest threat to human progress is not lack of intelligence, it is loss of memory. As we prepare to enter the next hall, where the objects themselves await, we carry this perspective with us. We are not about to witness miracles. We are about to encounter survivors. Each object ahead endured not because it was inevitable, but because it was lucky. Lucky enough to be buried, lucky enough to be hidden, lucky enough to be overlooked. They whisper to us across time, not with certainty, not with answers, but with a shared vulnerability. They remind us that knowledge must be defended, that brilliance must be preserved, that memory must be protected, or it will vanish. And now, with this understanding, we are ready. The doors to the next hall are open. The mechanisms, the materials, and the maps are waiting. Let us step inside. We move now from memory into matter, from philosophy into metal, from ideas into mechanisms. This hall feels different from the last. The air is heavier, cooler. It carries the quiet authority of machines that once moved, measured, and calculated. Here, the objects are not symbolic. They are functional. You can sense it immediately. These are not decorations. They are not ritual pieces meant only to be seen. They were meant to do something. This is the Hall of Lost Mechanisms, the hardware of the ancient world. Glass cases glow softly, revealing shapes that feel oddly familiar. Gears, cylinders, axles, forms that belong comfortably in workshops and laboratories, not in ruins and shipwrecks. And yet, here they are. We often imagine ancient technology as crude extensions of muscle, levers, ramps, simple tools magnifying physical effort. But what rests in this hall tells a different story. These devices magnified thought. They encoded knowledge into matter. They transformed abstract understanding into physical motion. They allowed ideas to persist even when words were lost. A mechanism is a frozen theory. Once built, it continues to express understanding without explanation. It performs logic silently. This is why mechanisms are so unsettling when they appear out of time. Because they imply more than craftsmanship. They imply planning, prediction, mathematical foresight. A gear is never accidental. Its teeth must be counted. Its ratios must be chosen. Its tolerances must be respected. To create one functioning mechanism is impressive. To create a system of interlocking mechanisms is transformative. It requires a worldview where nature is predictable, where motion follows rules, where the universe can be modeled, even partially, through structure. This hall asks a dangerous question. What did the ancients believe the universe was? Not spiritually, but mechanically. Did they see the cosmos as chaotic, or as something that could be mapped, simulated, and anticipated? The objects ahead suggest the latter. They suggest minds comfortable with cycles, ratios, and long-term patterns. Minds that observe the sky not as mystery, but as system. We are conditioned to think that such thinking belongs to modernity, to observatories and laboratories, to equations written on chalkboards. But mechanisms do not lie. They do not exaggerate. They only work if the understanding behind them is correct. Here, understanding was embedded in bronze and iron. The silence of this hall is intentional. Machines are quiet when they are no longer in motion. But even still, they communicate. They speak of workshops filled with measured sounds, of hands trained to precision, of knowledge passed not through books, but through practice. This kind of knowledge is especially vulnerable. It lives in muscle memory, in repetition, in tacit understanding. When those hands disappear, the knowledge disappears with them. Unlike monuments, machines are not meant to last forever. They wear, they break, they are replaced. This makes their survival even more remarkable. What we are about to see endured, despite being designed for use, not eternity. And because they endured, they force us to confront a reality we rarely acknowledge. That ancient societies were not only capable of complex thought, they were capable of applying it. They did not merely imagine systems. They built them. The modern mind often underestimates this kind of intelligence because it does not announce itself with writing. But mechanisms are writing, written in metal instead of ink. Each component is a sentence. Each assembly, an argument. And these arguments are precise. As we move closer to the first case, remember this. What you are about to see is not impressive because it is old. It is impressive because it works. It worked in a world without industrial infrastructure, without standardized manufacturing, without modern mathematics as we define it. It worked because someone understood something deeply enough to make it real. The first object in this hall is small, unassuming, at first glance, almost disappointing. It does not resemble a computer as we imagine one. There are no screens, no circuits, only corroded metal, broken fragments, a shape rescued from the sea. And yet, within that corroded mass lies a model of the universe. A device that tracked time, motion, and celestial cycles with astonishing accuracy. It should not exist where it does in history. But it does? And once you understand what it truly was, the timeline never looks the same again. Let us step closer. At first, it does not look like anything at all, just a corroded mass of bronze and stone, recovered from the seabed, fused together by time and salt. The kind of object that could easily be dismissed as debris. It was found in 1901, tangled among statues and amphorae at the bottom of the Aegean Sea. A shipwreck from the 1st century before Christ. A merchant vessel frozen in its final moment. For months, the object attracted little attention. It was catalogued, stored, nearly forgotten. Then it cracked. As the corrosion split, something unexpected appeared inside. Teeth, perfectly cut gear teeth. Not decorative, not symbolic, functional. What had looked like a shapeless lump was, in fact, a machine. This was the Antikythera Mechanism. To understand why this object is so disturbing, you must forget everything you associate with the word computer. No electricity, no code, no screens. This was a computer in the purest sense of the word. A device designed to compute. It did not store information. It processed relationships. When scientists began to study it seriously, they turned to X-ray imaging. Layer by layer, the interior was revealed. 30 interlocking bronze gears. Precision cut. Arranged in complex ratios. This was not a simple clock. This was a model. The front dial tracked the movements of the sun and the moon across the zodiac. The back dials predicted eclipses decades in advance. Not approximately, precisely. One dial followed the metonic cycle, a 19-year period aligning lunar months with solar years. Another tracked the Saros cycle, allowing eclipses to be forecast with remarkable reliability. This alone would be extraordinary. But the true shock came deeper inside. One set of gears formed a differential system, a mechanism that could model the irregular motion of the moon. The moon does not move at a constant speed. Its orbit accelerates and decelerates due to its elliptical path. To represent this mechanically requires advanced mathematical understanding. It requires the translation of nonlinear motion into physical ratios. This kind of differential gearing was believed to be a modern invention, a product of the Industrial Revolution, 19th century engineering. And yet, here it was, built over 2,000 years earlier. The Antikythera mechanism did not merely track time. It simulated celestial mechanics. It embodied a theory of the cosmos, a belief that the universe operated according to predictable rules, that those rules could be captured, encoded, and turned by hand. This is not craftsmanship alone. This is applied astronomy. Someone had to know the cycles. Someone had to calculate the ratios. Someone had to design the entire system before a single gear was cut. This was not improvised. It was planned. The mechanism likely sat in a wooden case with inscriptions on its surfaces. Instructions, explanations. Those inscriptions survive only in fragments, but they speak of planets, cycles, and predictions. This was a teaching device, an educational instrument, possibly even a navigational aid. Imagine this machine in its time, bronze polished, gears turning smoothly, a hand-cranked universe. Now imagine the world that produced it. Workshops capable of precision metallurgy. Artisans trained to cut gear teeth by hand with consistency. Mathematicians and astronomers collaborating with craftsmen. This is not the image we are taught to hold of the ancient world. We are taught that Greek astronomy was theoretical, philosophical, abstract, but this machine proves otherwise. Theory was not confined to scrolls. It was built, it was tested, it was used, and then it vanished. No other mechanism like it appears in the archaeological record for more than 1,000 years. No gradual evolution. No simplified descendants. It is as if an entire technological tradition blinked out of existence. This absence is what makes the Antikythera mechanism so unsettling. Not because it is advanced, but because it is alone. A single surviving representative of a lost lineage. We know from ancient texts that such devices existed. References to complex astronomical machines appear in Greek and Roman writings. But words do not survive the way metal does. This one did, by accident. The ship sank. The sea preserved what fire and conquest would have destroyed. If it had reached its destination, it would likely have been melted down, recycled, forgotten. Instead, it waited 2 millennia in darkness. When we look at the Antikythera mechanism, we are not seeing the birth of technology. We are seeing the tip of an iceberg. This device did not emerge from ignorance. It emerged from maturity. You do not build something like this unless the underlying knowledge is already well developed, unless mistakes have already been made, unless simpler versions have already existed. Those earlier machines are gone. Wood rots, bronze is reused, workshops burn. All that remains is this one survivor, and it forces a profound reconsideration. If ancient people could build a mechanical model of the heavens, what else did they build? What other devices vanished without trace? We often ask how such a machine could exist so early. But that question assumes that history moves only forward. A better question is this: how much has been lost? The Antikythera mechanism is not an anomaly in intelligence. It is an anomaly in survival. It reminds us that ancient science was not always speculative. It was operational. It produced tools that worked. And it warns us that technological brilliance does not guarantee continuity. Without preservation, even the most sophisticated knowledge can disappear so completely that future generations doubt it ever existed. As we step away from this case, carry that thought with you. This was not magic. It was not mystery. It was engineering. And it happened long before we were taught it could. The next case is smaller, quieter, easier to overlook. There is no complexity of gears here, no visible precision, no immediate sense of motion. It is simply a jar, a modest clay vessel, yellowed with age, standing no taller than a human hand. The kind of object that could have held grain, oil, or water. The kind of object archaeologists find by the thousands. And yet, this one was set apart. Discovered near Baghdad in the 1930s, the jar dates to the Parthian period, roughly 2,000 years ago. At first, it seemed unremarkable. Another domestic container from the ancient world. But like the mechanism before it, this object did not reveal its secret all at once. Inside the jar was a rolled copper cylinder, and inside that cylinder, an iron rod. The top was sealed with asphalt, insulating the contents from the outside world. This was not how storage jars were made. There was no practical reason to isolate iron from copper inside a sealed container, unless isolation was the point. When the object was examined more closely, something unsettling emerged. This was not a coincidence of materials. This was a system. Any student of physics would recognize it immediately. Copper, iron, and electrolyte. Together, they form a galvanic cell. Fill the jar with a weak acid, such as vinegar or fermented wine, and a chemical reaction begins. Electrons flow. Voltage is produced. The jar generates electricity. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, literally. Experiments conducted with reconstructed versions of the object produced measurable current, approximately 1 volt, a small amount, but undeniable. This is where history grows uncomfortable. Electricity is not supposed to be here. According to the standard narrative, the concept of electrical current belongs to the modern world, to laboratories, coils, and controlled experiments, to figures like Franklin and Faraday. And yet, here is a device that produces electricity 2 millennia earlier. No lightning, no kites, no equations, just chemistry. This raises an immediate question. Why? Electricity is not useful unless you know what to do with it. And knowledge does not exist in isolation. There are theories. One possibility is electroplating, using current to deposit a thin layer of precious metal onto an object. Gold plating without fire, without hammering. This would explain the need for controlled, low-voltage current. It would explain the choice of materials. It would explain why the process left so little trace. Electroplating does not leave behind large machines. It leaves finished objects. Another possibility is ritual, a sensory effect, a shock, a spark interpreted as divine. But even ritual requires understanding. You must know that the effect will occur. You must know how to reproduce it. Either way, intention is undeniable. This jar was not accidental. It was assembled deliberately. Each material chosen for its properties. Each component isolated to allow a reaction. Someone understood that combining metals in the presence of liquid could produce energy. They may not have called it electricity. They did not need to. They only needed to know that it worked. This is the quiet brilliance of ancient technology. Not theory-heavy, not formally documented, but practical. Knowledge embedded in process. The most unsettling aspect of the Baghdad battery is not its output. It is its simplicity. There is no elaborate craftsmanship here, no visible sophistication, which suggests something even more troubling. If this device was simple, it was likely not unique. Simple things are made often. They are taught easily. They spread quietly. And yet, we do not find dozens of them. We find fragments. Isolated examples. Ambiguity. This suggests that whatever knowledge produced this object did not survive intact. It did not become institutional. It did not become foundational. It flickered, and then it went dark. Electricity does not change the world unless it is scaled, unless it is systematized, unless it is protected by continuity. Here, it was not. Perhaps the use was narrow. Perhaps the knowledge was guarded. Perhaps it was lost when the people who practiced it disappeared. We do not know, and that uncertainty is the point. The Baghdad battery does not prove that ancient civilizations had electrical grids. It proves something far more subtle, that the behavior of nature was being explored experimentally, that cause and effect were being tested, that energy was being coaxed from matter. This is not accidental discovery. It is applied curiosity. Like the Antikythera Mechanism, this object is unsettling, not because it is miraculous, but because it is plausible. There is no violation of physics here. No need for impossible explanations. Only a violation of expectation. We expect the ancient world to observe nature, not to manipulate it at this level. But this jar tells us they did, quietly, locally, without leaving a revolution behind. It is a reminder that discovery does not guarantee transformation. That insight does not always reshape civilization. Sometimes it exists briefly, solves a narrow problem, and disappears. And when it disappears, history smooths over the gap. Electricity becomes modern again. Innovation resets. We are left staring at a clay jar, trying to decide what it means. This is the power of small objects. They do not overwhelm us with scale. They undermine us with implication. This jar does not shout. It whispers. It tells us that ancient minds were not waiting for modern science to begin asking questions. They were already asking them. They were already experimenting, already combining materials, already discovering that the world responds when you arrange it correctly. And then, for reasons we may never fully understand, that knowledge did not continue. The spark faded. As we step away from this case, Remember this. Progress is not a guarantee. Discovery is not destiny. Knowledge can appear, function, and vanish, leaving behind only a container that looks ordinary. Until you look inside. We leave the soundless ticking of gears behind us now. The certainty of rotation. The comfort of motion that can be followed with the eye. As we walk, the architecture of the museum begins to change. The walls feel less rigid. The light grows softer, more diffuse, as if clarity itself has been intentionally reduced. This is not a hall built for machines. This is a hall built for matter. Here, nothing moves, and yet everything is in motion. The ancients understood something we often forget. That not all power announces itself through force. Some of the most profound transformations occur quietly, invisibly, at scales too small to notice unless you know how to look. This is the hall of lost chemistry, the science of transformation, of reactions rather than mechanisms, of cause and effect unfolding silently inside materials. If the previous hall spoke the language of mathematics and motion, this one speaks the language of intimacy. Chemistry does not reveal itself through size. It reveals itself through behavior. A color that shifts. A surface that reflects light differently. A material that responds to its environment in ways that feel almost alive. For most of history, this kind of knowledge was not called science. It was called craft, or art, or sometimes magic. Not because it was mystical, but because its workings were hidden. Chemistry operates beneath perception. You cannot watch electrons move. You cannot see atoms rearrange themselves. You can only see the result. And because of this, chemical mastery is easily underestimated. We are taught to associate technological sophistication with visibility, with moving parts, with complexity that can be diagrammed. But chemistry laughs at this bias. A single grain of material, added at the right moment, can change everything. A trace amount of impurity can alter color, strength, transparency, or behavior. To control this requires extraordinary sensitivity. Not brute force, not speed, attention. The ancient world was filled with such attention. Glassmakers, metalworkers, dyers, alchemists. They worked without microscopes, without spectrometers, without theoretical models written in equations. And yet, they learned to coax matter into states that seem impossible even now. This hall exists to remind us that intelligence does not always leave behind obvious footprints. Chemical knowledge rarely survives in diagrams. It survives, if at all, in finished objects. And finished objects lie. They appear simple, decorative, aesthetic. They do not reveal the process that created them. They do not advertise the understanding embedded within them. For centuries, historians admired the beauty of ancient materials without questioning their behavior. They praised artistry where they should have investigated science, because we are conditioned to separate the two. We assume that ancient objects are beautiful because they were meant to be beautiful. We rarely ask whether they were also experiments. This hall asks us to reconsider that assumption. Chemical mastery is especially vulnerable to loss. Unlike mechanical knowledge, which can sometimes be reverse engineered, chemistry depends on precise conditions, temperature, timing, proportions measured not in numbers, but in experience, recipes passed from master to apprentice, adjustments made by feel, knowledge embedded in the hands rather than the mind. When that chain breaks, the result becomes impossible to reproduce. You can stare at the object forever and still not know how it was made. This is why chemistry disappears so cleanly from history. The artifacts remain. The methods vanish. We are left with outcomes without understanding. And because of that, we tend to underestimate the intelligence behind them. We tell ourselves that ancient people stumbled into these results, that they discovered them accidentally, that they did not truly understand what they were doing. This is another comforting story, because it allows us to admire without feeling threatened. But accident does not produce consistency. Accident does not produce control. Accident does not produce repeatable behavior. What you will see in this hall was not accidental. It was engineered, not with equations, but with observation refined over generations. The ancients did not separate chemistry from daily life. They lived inside it. They fermented. They alloyed. They glazed. They dyed. They watched how materials responded to heat, light, and time. They noticed patterns. They refined techniques. They learned which combinations worked and which failed. This is science in its most human form, not abstract, not institutional, but deeply empirical. And yet, because it left behind no formulas, we struggle to recognize it as such. The object we are about to encounter has been known for centuries. It has been displayed, catalogued, admired. It sat quietly in museums, labeled as a masterpiece of ancient craftsmanship. And that label was not wrong. It was simply incomplete. Only in the late 20th century did scientists begin to ask a different question. Not how beautiful it was, but why it behaved the way it did. When they did, the answer was astonishing. Hidden inside this object was a level of material control that operates at a scale we associate with modern laboratories, with nanometers, with engineered particles measured in billionths of a meter. This is not a metaphor. This is not poetic exaggeration. This is chemistry at the threshold of the invisible. The implications are unsettling, because this kind of control is not intuitive. It cannot be achieved by chance. It requires experimentation, failure, refinement, and understanding. It suggests that ancient artisans were not merely shaping matter. They were manipulating its fundamental properties. And then, for reasons we may never fully understand, that knowledge did not continue. The technique survived only in the object itself, a silent result of a lost process. This is the tragedy and the beauty of chemical artifacts. They endure precisely because they were successful, but they hide the intelligence that made them possible. As we stand at the entrance to this display, let go of the idea that science must look modern to be real. Let go of the assumption that sophistication requires documentation. Here, sophistication survived only as outcome. A cup, a color, a reaction to light. And when you see it change, when you understand why it changes, the boundary between ancient and modern dissolves. The object ahead does not shout its secret. It waits for someone to look closely enough to notice that something is wrong, something too precise, too controlled, too advanced for comfort. Let us step forward. At first, it appears to belong to a familiar category. A cup, a vessel, an object made to be held, admired, and used. It is Roman glass, crafted sometime in the 4th century of the Common Era. Delicate, thin, intricately carved. The surface depicts a scene from myth. A king entangled in vines. A moment of divine punishment frozen in translucent material. For centuries, this is how it was understood. As art, as symbolism, as evidence of Roman craftsmanship at its aesthetic peak, placed in museums, described in catalogs, admired for its beauty, nothing more. Then someone noticed something strange. Under normal lighting, the cup appears green, a soft, jade-like green, the color of leaves, of patinated bronze, of aged glass. But when light passes through it, rather than reflecting off its surface, the color changes, not subtly, not gradually, completely. The green disappears, and in its place, the cup glows red, deep, ruby, almost alive, the same object, the same material, two radically different colors. This is not a trick of the eye, not a surface treatment, not paint. It is intrinsic to the glass itself. For a long time, this behavior was treated as a curiosity, a charming oddity, an accident of ancient craftsmanship. But accidents do not behave this consistently. The color change is precise, predictable, repeatable. It responds only to the direction of light. Front lit, the cup is green. Backlit, it turns red. This phenomenon has a name, dichroism, and dichroism at this level should not exist in ancient glass. In the late 20th century, scientists decided to look closer, not at the shape, not at the imagery, at the material. Using electron microscopy, they examined the glass at a scale invisible to the human eye. What they found was astonishing. Embedded within the glass were tiny particles of gold and silver, not flakes, not dust. Particles measured in nanometers, approximately 50 nanometers in size. To put that into perspective, this is smaller than a virus, not much larger than DNA itself. At this scale, materials behave differently. Metals interact with light in ways that do not occur at larger sizes. The particles inside the cup scatter and absorb light selectively, producing different colors depending on how light moves through the material. This is not pigmentation. This is nanotechnology. The cup does not merely contain gold and silver. It contains them at a size and distribution that precisely controls optical behavior. This is not something that happens by chance. To achieve this, the glassmaker had to introduce metallic particles into molten glass in just the right proportions. They had to control temperature, cooling rate, chemical environment. Too much metal, and the glass would become opaque. Too little, and the effect would disappear. Too large, and the particles would reflect light like ordinary metal. Too small, and they would lose their optical properties. What we see here is balance. Intentional balance. Someone knew how to make matter behave this way. They may not have described it in modern scientific terms. They did not need to. They worked empirically, through experimentation refined over time. They observed how glass responded. They adjusted. They repeated. And eventually, they achieved something extraordinary. A material that interacts with light at the nanoscale. Modern scientists use similar principles today, in sensors, in optical filters, in advanced materials engineering. And yet, here it is, encased in a Roman drinking vessel. This realization changes how the object must be understood. It is not merely decorative. It is functional. Not in the sense of holding liquid, but in the sense of demonstrating control. Control over matter at a scale we associate with modern laboratories. This forces a difficult question. How many other objects like this existed? How many were admired without being understood? How many secrets vanished because no one thought to look closely enough? The Lycurgus Cup survived because it was beautiful, because someone valued it enough to preserve it. Its knowledge did not survive because it was invisible. The technique that created this effect did not become institutional. It was not written down in a way that endured. When the workshops closed, the knowledge closed with them. What remains is a result without a recipe. We often imagine ancient chemistry as crude, as trial and error, as accidental discovery. But this cup suggests something else. It suggests intentional manipulation of materials at a level that requires deep understanding, not theoretical understanding as we define it today, but practical mastery, the kind that comes from long observation and careful control. The unsettling part is not that the Romans could do this. It is that they could do it and then forget how. This object does not indicate a straight path from ignorance to enlightenment. It indicates a peak, a moment of mastery, and then silence. The Lycurgus Cup is not an isolated miracle. It is a survivor of a lost tradition, a reminder that ancient science did not always announce itself with equations. Sometimes it glowed quietly in the presence of light. As we step away from this display, let this settle. The past was not waiting for us to discover science. It was already practicing it. And in some cases, practicing it at scales we have only just begun to understand. As you watch the colors of this cup shift with the light, something becomes clear. The word primitive no longer fits. It is a word we use to feel safe, a label that creates distance, a way to reassure ourselves that we stand apart from the past. But the objects in this hall do not allow that comfort. They remind us that intelligence is not linear, that discovery is not owned by any single era, that what we call modern is often just remembered. If this quiet journey through lost knowledge resonates with you, if these fragments of forgotten brilliance stir something deeper, consider subscribing to the channel. This museum is vast. The collection is far from complete, and we have only begun to open the cases. We leave the realm of reactions now, the invisible dances of particles, the quiet transformations hidden inside glass and metal. As we walk forward, the museum changes its posture. The ceilings feel higher, the angles sharper, the light more intentional, as if it has been instructed where to fall and where to avoid. This is not a hall dedicated to what matter does. Purpose, and purpose implies testing. You do not arrive at an optimized shape without iteration, without failure, without refinement. Iteration requires time, resources, and a context that allows experimentation to continue without being erased. The objects waiting here do not feel like first attempts. They feel like answers. Answers to questions we did not believe had been asked yet. For much of history, we have assumed that ancient design followed ritual before function, that symbolism came first, that efficiency emerged only later. This hall challenges that assumption directly. Here, form does not follow myth. Form follows behavior. These objects look like solutions to physical problems. Problems involving motion, flow, scale. Problems that require an understanding of how the world behaves beyond immediate human experience. One object appears to echo a component meant to move fluid or air. Another suggests a perspective that should not be available from the ground. Together, they force a re-examination of how ancient people perceived their environment. Did they think only locally? Or did they think systemically? Design reveals worldview. A society that designs only for immediate needs produces different shapes than one that imagines future states. One that anticipates interaction with forces it cannot directly control. The shapes in this hall imply anticipation. They imply that ancient designers were not merely reacting to the world. They were modeling it. This is where discomfort deepens. Empirically, through observation refined into intuition, this kind of knowledge does not announce itself with writing. It announces itself through form, and form is unforgiving. If design assumptions are wrong, objects fail. They wobble. They break. They do not behave as intended. The objects here did not fail. They survived. And survival suggests that they were valued, preserved, protected, even if their purpose was no longer remembered. This is a critical point. Many ancient objects were kept long after their original function was forgotten. They became ceremonial, symbolic, decorative, but their shapes remained, frozen evidence of an earlier understanding. We often misinterpret this as ritual origin. But ritual is frequently the afterlife of function. When knowledge is lost, meaning shifts. A tool becomes a symbol. A machine part becomes an ornament. A map becomes a curiosity. The hall of impossible design is filled with such afterlives. Objects that outlived the knowledge that gave them meaning. And because of that, they confuse us. They do not align with our expectations of their time. They feel premature, out of sequence. They suggest that ancient cultures may have solved problems we no longer associate with them, not globally, not industrially, but locally, brilliantly. This hall does not argue for forgotten supercivilizations. It argues for forgotten moments, moments where insight briefly crystallized, where someone saw the world differently and shaped matter accordingly. Those moments did not last. They did not scale. They did not rewrite history, but they left traces. And traces are enough to disturb certainty. In this space, the museum grows quieter, not because there is less to say, but because there is more to consider. These objects demand a different kind of attention, not analysis alone, but imagination disciplined by evidence. As we approach the first case, prepare to set aside assumptions about what ancient design should look like. Do not ask whether it fits the timeline. Ask whether it fits the problem it appears to solve. Because once you do, the question changes. Not how could this exist, but why did it not continue? Let us step closer. At first sight, it feels fragile. Too fragile. A thin disk of stone, carved more than 5,000 years ago, during Egypt's first dynasty. Its material is metasiltstone, schist, a stone that flakes, a stone that splits, a stone that resists precision. And yet, this object is precise. The disk is shallow, circular, and symmetrical. At its center, a raised hub. Radiating outward, 3 curved lobes, evenly spaced, sweeping forward as if frozen mid-motion. It resembles a wheel. But not quite. It resembles a fan, or an impeller, or a flywheel designed to interact with fluid or air. It does not resemble anything we expect from 3000 BC. This is the schist disk of Sabu. It was discovered in a tomb at Saqqara, buried alongside ceremonial objects and offerings. Its owner was Sabu, a high official, not a king, not a god, which already raises questions. Because objects buried in tombs were chosen carefully, they were meaningful. They were symbolic of status, function, or identity. This disk was important enough to accompany someone into the afterlife. But why? It is not decorative in any conventional sense. There are no inscriptions, no imagery, no ornamentation, only form. And that form is unsettling. The lobes are thin, delicately undercut. They curve with aerodynamic elegance. Any attempt to carve this shape from schist by hand would be extraordinarily risky. One wrong strike and the entire piece would fracture. This alone demands explanation. You do not choose a brittle material for an unnecessarily complex shape unless the shape matters. The disk does not look like art. It looks like a component. Something meant to spin, something meant to move matter. The central hub suggests mounting, attachment to an axle. The curved lobes suggest interaction with air, with liquid. In modern terms, it resembles a centrifugal impeller. But such concepts are not supposed to exist here. According to conventional history, this period marks the early stages of Egyptian technology. Stone tools, simple vessels, the very beginning of the wheel. And yet, this object implies understanding far beyond that narrative. It implies rotational symmetry, balance, flow. These are not intuitive concepts. To design a shape that efficiently moves fluid, you must observe how matter behaves when set in motion. You must notice vortices, resistance, acceleration. You must refine shape based on behavior. This implies experimentation. But experimentation leaves traces, prototypes, failures. We have none. Only this, One disk, perfectly formed, contextless. Some have suggested it was ceremonial, symbolic, a stylized lotus. But symbolism rarely demands such structural precision. Symbolic objects do not need central hubs capable of bearing load. They do not need thin, evenly distributed lobes. Function explains form more cleanly than ritual does. Others have suggested it was a stone copy of a functional object originally made in another material, metal, wood. This possibility opens an unsettling door. If this is a copy, then the original is gone. Wood decays. Metal is melted down. Stone survives. Which would mean this disk is not the technology itself. It is an echo, a fossilized memory of something that once moved. Perhaps it was a pump component. Perhaps part of a mechanical device now lost. Perhaps something we no longer recognize because the system it belonged to vanished entirely. We must be careful here. This object does not prove that ancient Egypt had advanced machinery. That would be an overreach. But it does prove something quieter and more important. That ancient designers were capable of conceiving shapes optimized for behavior, not just appearance. That they could imagine motion abstractly. That they could freeze that motion into form. The unsettling question is not what this disk did. It is why someone thought to make it like this. Because no one accidentally invents an optimized shape. Optimization is the result of feedback, of seeing what works and adjusting accordingly. And that requires time. The schist disk of Sabu sits at the edge of our understanding, not because it is impossible, but because it is isolated. There is no family of similar objects, no developmental lineage. It appears fully formed and then disappears. Like the Antikythera Mechanism, like the Baghdad battery, like the Lycurgus Cup. A moment of clarity, and then silence. This is the pattern repeating itself. Not continuous progress, but flashes, insight without inheritance. When we look at this disk, we are not looking at evidence of lost empires or forbidden knowledge. We are looking at a reminder that intelligence can produce forms that outlive explanation. That design can survive even when purpose does not. This object does not demand belief. It demands humility, because it tells us that the past may have understood forces we only recognize now, not universally, not permanently, but briefly, and briefly is enough. As we step away from this case, hold on to that thought, because the final object in this hall pushes the question even further, not into motion, but into vision. A view of the world that should not have been possible, and yet was drawn anyway. This final case does not contain a machine. It does not contain a vessel. It does not contain a component that once moved or reacted. It contains a perspective, a map. At first glance, it seems familiar. A piece of parchment, ink lines faded by time, coastlines, notes, decorative flourishes. It was drawn in 1513 by Piri Reis, an Ottoman admiral and cartographer. Compiled, as he himself wrote, from much older source maps, some Greek, some Arabic, some whose origins he could not name. This alone is not unusual. Maps have always been compilations, knowledge layered upon knowledge, copies of copies. But this map refuses to behave. It depicts the western coast of Africa, the eastern coastline of South America, and it does so with a level of accuracy that should not exist in the early 16th century. The proportions are coherent, the angles consistent, the coastlines recognizable. This is not guesswork. It is not symbolic geography. It is measured, but this is only the beginning. At the bottom of the map, something stranger appears. A landmass, unlabeled, unclaimed, drawn with confidence rather than speculation. Its shape corresponds not to myth, but to Antarctica. Not as we know it today, but as it once was. The coastline shown matches Queen Maud Land, a region that has been buried beneath ice for thousands of years. Ice so thick that the land beneath cannot be seen without modern technology. And yet, here it is, ice-free. This is the point where the room grows quiet. Because mapping a coastline requires observation. You cannot invent accurate geography by imagination alone. You must see it. Or you must inherit data from someone who did. Antarctica was officially discovered centuries later. And even then, its true shape was hidden beneath glaciers. To map it without ice implies access to information from a much earlier time. A time when the continent's coastline was exposed. That time, according to geology, predates recorded history. This is where easy explanations begin to fail. Some suggest coincidence. But coincidence does not produce proportional coastlines. Some suggest misinterpretation. But multiple features align too closely. Some suggest that the map is wrong. But parts of it are demonstrably right. This is the tension the Piri-Reis map creates. It is not perfectly accurate by modern standards, but it is far too accurate for its time. And accuracy is not evenly distributed, which suggests something crucial. Piri-Reis was not inventing geography. He was compiling it. He was working from older sources, sources already ancient in his time. Maps drawn by people who saw the world differently, perhaps from ships that sailed farther than we assume, perhaps from knowledge preserved through collapse, perhaps from a time when coastlines were not what they are now. We do not need to assume lost global civilizations. We do not need to imagine impossible technologies. We only need to accept one uncomfortable possibility, that some ancient knowledge was inherited without its story. The map is not impossible because it shows Antarctica. It is unsettling because it suggests continuity where we expect ignorance. It implies that geographic understanding did not begin where we say it did, that it may have been reset. Like the other objects in this museum, the Piri-Reis map is not a declaration. It is a residue, a fragment of a larger body of knowledge that did not survive intact. It shows us a world observed from above, not just walked upon. A world measured, not mythologized. And it forces a final, haunting question. If someone once mapped the Earth this well, what else did they know? And why do we no longer remember? As we step away from this final case, the hall feels different, heavier, not because answers were given, but because certainty was taken away. This map does not ask you to believe. It asks you to doubt the completeness of the story you were taught. And sometimes, doubt is the most honest response history allows. We have walked through rooms filled with contradictions. A machine that calculated the heavens before the modern age had words for physics. A clay jar that quietly produced electricity in a world lit by fire. A glass cup that manipulates light at a scale smaller than sight itself. A stone disc shaped as if it were meant to move air or water. A map that remembers a world no longer visible. 5 objects, 5 interruptions. They do not belong to a single culture. They do not come from a single era. They are separated by oceans, centuries, and belief systems. And yet, they speak the same language, not of mystery, but of capability. These objects are not curiosities meant to shock. They are witnesses, witnesses to a truth we resist. That human ingenuity is not a modern invention. That intelligence does not move in a straight line. That progress is not guaranteed by time alone. The story we prefer is comforting. A steady climb from darkness into enlightenment. A narrative where each generation knows more than the last. But history does not behave that way. Knowledge rises. Knowledge fractures. Knowledge is forgotten. Not because it was wrong, but because it was fragile. Civilizations do not fail because they lack intelligence. They fail because they lose continuity. When memory breaks, genius resets. And when genius resets, later generations mistake silence for absence. This realization does not diminish us. It connects us. The minds that built these objects were not alien. They were human. They looked at the sky with the same curiosity. They struggled with the same limitations. They solved problems with the same blend of imagination and discipline. They experimented. They refined. They succeeded. And then, like all things human, their knowledge became vulnerable to time. There is something profoundly humbling in this. We are not the first to wonder. We are not the first to build. And we will not be the last to forget. The river of time does not carry knowledge forward automatically. It must be held, protected, passed deliberately. Without that effort, even brilliance dissolves. The museum is quiet now. The lights dim further, one by one. The glass cases reflect only darkness. The gears of the ancient mechanism no longer turn. The spark inside the clay jar sleeps. The colors of the glass cup fade into shadow. The stone disk rests without motion. The map returns to ink and parchment. Silence settles. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of deep time. A silence filled with lives lived, with questions asked, with answers that once existed. And now, rest. This was a journey through the fractures of history, through moments where certainty gave way to wonder. Another story from the endless river of time. If you wish to continue exploring these quiet mysteries, to walk these halls again, consider following the channel. New rooms will open. New cases will wait in the shadows. For now, let the noise of the modern world fade. The museum doors are closing. The night is calm. Sleep well, dreamer of ages.